I get many calls a week from folks asking where they can have a short-term rental in the Denver Front Range area, the Denver metro area. And this is somewhat of a moving target, so definitely check the date of this video to make sure that regulations haven't changed. With this said, I have put together a short-term rental regulations guideline because there isn't really a great resource out there on the internet with regards to this topic. You have to go to the individual counties and cities to see what their regulations are. And so I've already done some of this homework for you, and will periodically go through and update my spreadsheet because, again, this is a moving target. Now, if you'd like a copy of that document, just reach out to me via my website, mglunk.com, and I'd be happy to shoot you over a copy of my short-term rental regulations guideline. I'm not only an agent who specializes in working with investors, but I also create educational content here on YouTube around real estate investing. So why work with me? Why even listen to me? Well, the reality is I'm not perfect, but I have been doing this a while, and I was able to leave the W-2 world because of my investing in real estate in both short-term and long-term rentals, because of that cash flow that I generated from purchasing those properties. And so as a result of that, I've learned some things along the way that I share with my clients as well as here on my YouTube channel. So I don't just talk about this real estate investing thing, I actually do it myself as well. Denver and the Front Range area definitely have restrictions around short-term rentals, and so you need to make sure that you thoroughly understand what the regulations are around short-term rentals in the specific area that you're looking to invest. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing because it helps to keep the competition out. And that leaves more opportunity for folks like you that are willing to put in the effort to learn about the process and learn about the regulations that they need to consider when purchasing a property. So let's talk about regulations. Regulations are either coming from typically a city and or a county, sometimes both, but generally it's usually one of them. And so if it's an actual incorporated city or town, typically, not always, but typically it's coming from that city or town. And if it's in an unincorporated area, then typically it's coming from the county. As an example, I live in Evergreen, Colorado, and Evergreen is an unincorporated area, and so short-term rentals here are regulated by the county, which in this case is Jefferson County. Now, this isn't 100% everywhere, but in general, it's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, I also invest in other areas around the country, and so if you're watching this video and you're not from the Denver area and are looking to invest here, odds are your area follows a similar pattern. Now, if you're looking at starting a short-term rental and it's not your primary residence, well, then that definitely narrows in the areas that you should think about investing in, because there are more restrictions for properties that are not your primary residence. We'll get into what some of those areas are, and that'll actually be the bulk of this video. But first, let me talk about folks that are looking to short-term rent a property that is their primary residence, because that opens you up specifically to Denver. So let's talk about Denver quickly, because I get a lot of questions about Denver because a lot of people live in this area and they want to short-term rent their properties, especially when we look at the cost of housing and how it's increasing. Short-term renting part of your property or all of your property can be a good way to provide additional income to help afford the purchase of a property in the Denver area. So what are some ways that you can do that? Well, first and foremost, there is the rent by the room scenario. This is where you buy, for example, a house, and let's just say for argument's sake, it's a 3-bedroom house. And so one of the bedrooms you keep for yourself, and then you rent out the other bedrooms as a short-term rental to folks that come into the area. That's one way of thinking about it and approaching it. Another area is to buy a property with multiple units. So think of a small multifamily property. For example, a small multifamily property would be a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. The great thing about these are that you can finance them just like you would a traditional single family home, so you can get the best rate possible, but you have other units that you can rent out. Another option would be to purchase a property, for example, a single family home with maybe an ADU out back that already exists, or a single family home that you could build an ADU on the back of. Now, in this scenario, you're living in one of the units and renting out the other unit. So for example, let's take the single family home with the ADU. You could live either in the ADU or the single family home. In fact, if you're looking to create as much income as possible, you may want to live in the ADU because odds are the house up front is bigger and you can therefore command more rent. But again, as long as this is your primary residence, you can then rent out either unit as a short-term rental. Another option is to rent the property out when you travel. So maybe you travel a lot for work, or maybe you oftentimes take big long trips in the summer. Even if they're not long, even if they're just a week long, you could still put your property up for rent as a short-term rental and produce some additional income. Now, of course, you're not going to create a significant amount of rental income if you are just renting it out when you travel, unless you travel significantly. But it is a good way to help bring in some income to help offset your payments for your property. All right, so let's now transition into what are some locations in the Front Range area that I recommend where you can rent the property out when it's not your primary residence, right? When it's just purely a rental. All right, so let's talk about Arvada, because Arvada is a great place location-wise for a short-term rental. Now, they do have some restrictions in that they have a maximum of 240 days that you're allowed to short-term rent your property per year. Now, this kind of catches some people off guard. They feel held back by it, but the reality is I say run your analysis. And if your analysis works with those parameters, then why not? Because the reality is you're never going to have 100% occupancy. That's just the nature of things. There are slow seasons, there are shoulder seasons, and there also are ways to navigate around this. So for example, you could midterm rent your property during slow shoulder seasons. After you kind of understand the lay of the land and you understand what are some of the prime areas for your property, and if you feel like, wow, I'm being held back by only being able to rent for 240 days, I can make so much more money because my property is so popular. If that's you and that is the case, there are other ways to, again, still increase the gross revenues for your property through monthly renting, right? Take a look at your calendar, figure out when your average daily rate, so that nightly rate is lowest, and then instead of short-term renting it during that time frame, midterm rent it. Because if you're renting your property for 30 plus days, you are not held to short-term rental regulations and standards. And so find those opportunities then to midterm rent the property so that you are opening up the days where you can have the highest potential to get your maximum average nightly rate and therefore increase the gross revenue of your property. All right, the next place I want to talk about is Wheat Ridge. Now, Wheat Ridge is split up into districts and they allocate a certain number of short-term rental license per district. So as we can see here on the screen, currently there are available licenses in both Districts 3 as well as District 4 in Wheat Ridge. And so this is something you want to check out. You can just Google it, City of Wheat Ridge short-term rental regulations, and you can navigate your way to seeing how many licenses are still available. You can also then navigate to the map where they showcase where the districts are, right? So obviously District 1, 2, 3, and 4 isn't helpful unless you know geographically where that region is. And so you can find this map on the Wheat Ridge, City of Wheat Ridge site, as well. So you can kind of understand where you should be looking for a short-term rental. Wheat Ridge from a location perspective is another great location that allows easy reach to places like Denver, as well as the mountains and also Red Rocks. Okay, the next place I want to talk about is Adams County, specifically Adams County because it's unincorporated, meaning they don't have any short-term rental regulations. Now, I say this kind of hesitantly because there are no regulations. No regulations can be great. Some negatives of no regulations are that you can have a short-term rental, but everybody else can have a short-term rental. Another negative is they don't currently have any laws now. It doesn't mean they won't have any laws in the future. And so that's a little bit of the risk that you take. It definitely is a great area. You just have to go into it knowing the lay of the land and knowing what the potentials are for the future, in that they could come down with restrictive regulations. However, right now, all signs show that that isn't happening or that it's not going to happen anytime in the near future, but things can always happen. So you have to go in aware, right? The nice thing about some areas that have regulations is they've put some thought into it and you know where their heads are at with regards to short-term rentals. And as long as you kind of fit within those parameters, you're good to go. Okay, there's my speech around Adams County. So let's take a look at the map because this area doesn't have strict regulations as of this recording. If you look at the map here, you'll see kind of this area north of this red and white dotted line. So think, 52nd Avenue and then north of Regis University, north of 53rd Avenue. This is kind of a prime area because, again, it's close to all these amenities. It's close to Regis University, but it's also sandwiched between that and Clear Creek, so you can jump on the trails there, which is great for guests. You also have easy access to highways if you wanted to get to other areas around the Denver area, for example, the mountains, Red Rocks, downtown Denver, you name it. There are some other areas that allow short-term rentals as of this recorded. North Glen and Westminster would be two places, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend those as my top short-term rental markets, primarily due to their location and access to things that guests and people coming into the area want to have access to. The other areas are Arvada, Adams County, in and around Regis University, as well as Wheat Ridge, are really closer into some of the key hubs and attractions of the Denver metro area. All right, so there you have it. Now, of this list, my short list would be Arvada and Wheat Ridge. I really like those areas because they have some regulation, they've put some thought into it, and they also have a close proximity to the foothills and places like Red Rocks, where guests come and want to stay and visit when they come to the Denver metro area. Okay, so what are some other considerations? First and foremost are HOAs. I am personally not a fan of HOAs for short-term rentals. It's not that I don't like HOAs in general, but they tend to not be short-term rental friendly. And again, it's just another layer of potential regulation that you'd have over your rental, and I prefer not to have that. All right, so the next thing to consider is the competition, right? How have they styled their properties? How can you make yourself stand out and be different and be more attractive to guests that are coming to the area so that they want to stay at your property versus the competition? Also, when we think about guests that are coming in, what is the competitive landscape with regards to bedroom count? Are the majority of units 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, and you should therefore go larger, 6, 7, 8 bedroom, or vice versa, right? You want to understand what the competition is so that you can take the steps now, especially when you're looking at analyzing and purchasing a property, to differentiate yourself from the competition and give yourself a leg up. The next consideration is to run your numbers, and I recommend that you at least run your numbers or get data from at least 2 sources. So what are some sources? Well, there are places like AirBnB where you can get numbers, as well as a website called Rabu, where you just type in the address and the number of bedrooms, and it'll populate the gross rental revenue for that property for the year. You can also do this manually by jumping into sites like Airbnb and Vrbo and looking at the competition, looking at the occupancy rate as well as the nightly rate, and calculating things for yourself. Another option is to reach out to a local property manager and have them produce some numbers for you for a specific property. One consideration as well, if you're looking to invest from out of state, you should definitely think about talking to some local property managers. It's a great thing to have boots on the ground. You can definitely manage from a distance. I have done this before, but you really have to make sure that your local team is dialed in to handle any issues. All right, so if this is something you want to do, I always recommend that you work with experts. And so if you want some help in finding a short-term rental property, you can definitely feel free to reach out directly to me. Also, please, if you like this content, then like and subscribe to my channel, because I will be creating more content just like this. And I already have a bunch of content on my channel around investing in real estate as well as investing in short-term rentals. Now, speaking of additional content, if you like this content around investing in short-term rentals in the Front Range, I also have a video around investing in short-term rentals in the foothills that I'll link at the end of this video, but you can also find it on my YouTube channel. All right, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more content just like this. We'll see you next time.